Hey, this is Mike from MDXpods. This episode of Ruin My Childhood is not going to be the PG-13 that we normally do. We're covering a pretty hard R Nicolas Cage movie with a lot of swears and curses, and even some of the interviews that we pull from actors and directors and writers talking about the movie had swears. So we're directly quoting people, so we're going to have swears. There's a lot of swears in this episode. I'm not going to have the time to go through and bleep and censor it.
Ton.
So deal with it.
Yeah.
I'm going to bleep that one 'cause it's during the warning. But thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy our episode on The Rock.
Ruin My Childhood.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Ruin My Childhood, the podcast where we decide if some things are better left in the past. I'm Mike.
And I'm Kat.
And what are we going to be talking about today, Kat?
The Rock.
The Rock. I'm really excited to watch this movie and talk about it. We've got the Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent coming out the day that this episode's going to drop. It's actually in my top 3 most anticipated movies of the year. And what a sweet way to bring in that movie by just talking about a Nicolas Cage movie. We talked about it for like about a half an hour the other day, trying to figure out which Nic Cage 90s movie we're going to do.
Man, it's so hard because he's so bad, but they're all so good.
Well, he's actually a good actor. He just makes odd choices. He is a very good actor. Like, he is an Academy Award-winning actor. He hit, like, the Pig movie he did last year, which has been in my queue on Hulu for a long time. I really want to watch it. People are saying it's one of his best performances. I think he is genuinely a good actor. He just makes really wild choices. He
Strong
takes big
choices.
swings. But I'm obviously a big fan. I am surprised that we haven't done a Nic Cage movie on this podcast yet.
I think what it is for me is that his personality is camp.
Correct.
And that's hard for me to get past.
He's definitely an interesting guy in real life. He did a...
Not that I dislike him. I'm not saying
No,
that.
I know you don't.
I'm just saying that every performance that he gives is so purely Nic Cage, and I think he as a person is maybe what's
Strange.
not reading for me.
Maybe. Well, and what's interesting is like he did a Reddit Ask Me Anything like a week or so ago, and I actually went through and read a lot of the stuff, and it was really interesting. He's actually really proud of all the work he's done over the last 10 years when he's been bankrupt, and he's just doing all these like movies, but he has made a point of saying like, yeah, I may have done a ton of bad movies, a ton of direct-to-DVD, VOD movies, but I put 100% in literally every single role I do. I don't treat it like this is just a paycheck. Like, he invests his like heart and soul, blood, sweat, and tears in every role. So
Right, he's consistent.
yeah, I think that's amazing, and I'm honestly surprised we haven't covered any of his movies on here
It's really
yet.
strange. I think I was making a strong case for Family Man during the holidays, and
Yeah, I think we should maybe do that around Christmas
such
this time
a good
around.
one.
I was torn between this and Con Air. Those are the two I really
Not
wanted
Face
to do.
Off.
Well, Face Off, you and I just watched that like a month ago, and you had never seen it before.
That was a wild ride.
That was a wild ride.
Holy crap!
So this was the happy medium that we did. What do you remember about this movie?
I don't remember this movie being anything resembling a happy medium. I think it was like balls to the wall the entire time. This movie slaps as far as I can remember.
Yeah, so
It's nonstop, and it's a long film.
Yeah, it's like 2 hours and 15 minutes. So it's long for the 90s, actually fairly medium length for today's standards. I get a little bit of an asterisk on this one because I actually watched this movie at some point during the pandemic when I went and visited Dustin. We watched this movie, but it was like watching it while like hanging out with a bro and having beers and talking
In
about
San
life.
Francisco?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
So yeah, in San Francisco. But we weren't really paying attention. We were rapping out about life, what it means to be a man
Ew.
in America today.
I mean, that's kind of at odds with being a man in San Francisco.
Yeah. But I mean, the things that when I think of this movie that pop in my head is that ridiculous car chase downhill in San Francisco. I vividly remember that. And I remember, I don't know if this is the opening scene, but I know it's towards the beginning, but there's a scene where Nicolas Cage's character is like, I really want to be a field agent. Like, he's an FBI agent, but he's kind of a lab geek. I want to be a field agent. And he has got like a little dart gun, like a plastic dart gun you can buy from like a grocery store. And he's like, is doing target shooting in his office and has like a Rube Goldberg machine kind of thing that he triggers with that. And I just remember, I'm like, that's totally things that I did as a kid. I used to set up little shooting ranges in my house and try to set off contraptions. So that's what comes to my mind when I think about this movie.
For me, it's all about the car chase.
The car chase
and
is
Sean
rad.
Connery. I mean,
The GOAT.
you know, I don't actually think of Nic Cage when I think of The Rock. I just think of Sean Connery.
You think of him saying, "Welcome to the Rock."
But I feel like a lot of that has to do with Celebrity Jeopardy.
Yeah.
It's been a minute.
It's been a minute for you. It's been a few years for me. But I'm really excited to go back and watch this with a critical eye and see if it holds up. Before we do that, though, do you have any comments from our listeners?
I do. Julie Mendez says, any movie with Michael Biehn in it is one worth watching, even despite the awful Rocket Man line later in the film.
I imagine that Rocket Man is a one-liner from Nic Cage or Sean Connery killing a guy, because they're both known for that. Michael...
I love a good one-liner accompanied with murder.
Michael Biehn is a typecast in this. He always plays like the really good soldier who still dies in the first or second act of the movie.
He just, as long as he dies, it's
Terminator,
a Michael Biehn movie.
Aliens, this soldier guy who gets killed. There we go. I've got one from Brian D that just says that Ferrari race at the beginning and Sean Connery is the GOAT. So what we brought up, we agree.
Exactly.
All right. Well, let's go watch the movie, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it. We'll talk about some of the production histories, maybe some controversies, and then we'll watch the movie.
You need some snacks.
Yeah.
There's a hostage situation on Alcatraz.
On June 7th,
You refuse payment, I launch the gas.
Power of this chemical is beyond anything you can imagine.
Alcatraz
You know the Rock. You broke out. Yeah, successfully.
is back in business.
Welcome to the Rock.
From Don Simpson and Jeff Bruckheimer, the producers of Top Gun and Crimson Tide.
You enjoying this?
Sean Connery, Nicolas Cage, Ed Harris. The Rock, directed by Michael Bay, rated R.
All right, we're back with the vengeance. We watched The Rock, but before we tell you about our experience watching The Rock, we're going to tell you a little bit about how the movie got made, a little bit of production stuff, and a little bit of trivia. So this movie was this was directed by Michael Bay, produced by Disney, was written by David Weisberg, Douglas Cook, and Mark Rosner. It had a budget of $75 million, made a whopping $335 million, which is huge in the 90s. Has a Rotten Tomatoes score of 68% for the critics and an 85% for the audience. That makes a ton of sense to me. Michael Bay movies don't tend to get a lot of critic love, but 68% is still considered fresh, so good for them.
Well, they were betting on this. It was a summer blockbuster.
Yeah, June 7th, 1996.
Oh,
I
what
was
a good time.
7.5 years old.
That was a sweet spot
Not
in
a
life.
care in the world.
It's all downhill from there. Downhill from 1996. This film was not without controversy and had a claim made with the Writers Guild of America. Only David Weisberg, Douglas Cook, and Mark Rosner got credit, but writers Jonathan Hensley, Aaron Sorkin, and Quentin Tarantino had passes on the script without credit.
Oof.
That explains a lot. Michael Bay wrote an open letter of protest in which he criticized the arbitration procedure as a sham and a travesty. He said Hensley had worked closely with him on the movie and should have received screen credit. Hensley would go on to work with Bay on Armageddon and got writing and producer credits. He would work again with producer Jerry Bruckheimer on 2 more Nic Cage movies, Con Air and Gone in 60 Seconds.
Wow.
At one point, the studio was trying to get Arnold Schwarzenegger to sign on as Mason, but at that point, the script was still a work in progress, and Arnold did not like what he saw. Eventually, Sean Connery was brought in, and they even built him a small cottage on Alcatraz so that he wouldn't have to commute from San Francisco to Alcatraz daily. That sounds really cold.
Yeah.
Nic Cage took the role to prove that he could do action. According to Cage, many insiders passed on him in previous action roles and did not think that he could carry a major blockbuster. He used this film to launch himself as a bona fide action hero. He immediately worked with Bruckheimer again on Con Air and Gone in 60 Seconds while filming Face Off in between.
That's a run.
He had an insane schedule for that, didn't he? Leave one set and go straight to the other and start shooting that day?
He left Con Air. So this I know. He left Con Air literally as soon as he was wrapped. He got in an airplane to go film Face Off. There was no lag time in between.
The film was originally much more serious, but Bay allowed the actors to improvise, leading to some humorous dialogue from Cage and a decision that Cage's character, Goodspeed, would not curse. Ed Harris also worked on his character and created a sympathetic villain. Ed Harris had a disagreement with Michael Bay's visual style as he acts with his full body, but Bay always shot him close up. Director Michael Bay and Walt Disney Studios executives who were supervising the production would butt heads. One time, Michael Bay was getting ready to leave the set for a meeting with the executives when he was approached by Sean Connery in golfing attire. Was he just like mulling about his cottage?
Yeah.
Connery, who also produced the film, asked Bay where he was going, and when Bay explained that he was meeting with the executives, Connery asked if he could accompany him. Bay complied, and when he arrived in the conference room, the executives' jaws dropped when they saw Connery appear behind him. Oh, that's a scary villain. According to Bay, Connery then stood up for him and insisted that he was doing a good job and should be left alone. Most of the film was shot on location in the Alcatraz prison on Alcatraz Island. As it is governed by the National Park Service, it was not possible to close down Alcatraz, and much of the filming had to accommodate tour parties milling around. It's a huge tourist draw.
Yeah.
Understandable. That sounds like a freaking
What's
nightmare.
funny, I've never been. And
I've
from
never
the Bay
been.
Area. It's
Yeah.
like a lot of New Yorkers never go to the Statue of Liberty or the Empire State Building.
Well, no one we ever hosted wanted to go to Alcatraz.
No.
I will say something about they had a claim made with the WGA, the Writers Guild of America. If their claims process is anything like the SAG-AFTRA claims process, you bring the claim, and then any disputes that cannot be resolved with the production are then referred to a committee, and it's like an inter-guild committee,
Yeah.
at least for our union, and their decision is final and binding. Like,
Yeah.
full stop, that's it. But I think, like, if you do pursue legal action further, you're kind of on your own with that. But I think people just have a lot more faith in, like, the processes for raising claims with unions.
I've never really understood. I don't remember. Like, I know there was some weird stuff with like the Justice League movie with Zack Snyder leaving because of his family drama and issues. You know, he lost his daughter. Understandably, he had to step away.
Well,
and
and
then
writing credits, like, if you're not, there are things that you have to do to earn your place in the WGA.
Yeah.
So it is really sensitive when someone's like right about to get in there and finally be able to join and get the clout that they need to make the projects that they want.
Yeah.
And then something like that is taken away.
But you hear about uncredited passes all this. Like Joss Whedon got his start because he was he punched up scripts. That's like what he was known for, and then eventually people gave him a shot to do his own stuff.
Well, and Quentin Tarantino did that on a lot of stuff.
A lot of stuff.
But he also brings in other people to do that on his films, which is pretty great.
Yeah.
I did think it's interesting that it's mentioned that Sean Connery was also a producer on the film, and it's like totally a different can of worms. I mean, obviously, because he didn't even really know about the meeting. He wasn't involved in that kind of process, and for the most part, probably didn't want to be involved in that process. Really, what that executive producer credit is clout and usually more money.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a better back end deal than you're able to get as just an actor, but for the most part, it's symbolic.
Yeah.
So it is surprising that Sean Connery was able to, like, you know, throw his weight around, but at the same time, like, that was probably just because he's Sean Connery.
This is mid-90s. This is before he did League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Like, he was still a major draw. This was only a few years after the Indiana Jones movie.
Oh, yeah. I still totally would fuck 1996 Sean Connery.
Even though he might slap you.
Oh, shit.
He
This
did
is
say
a
the
Disney film.
So
Also, how is this a Disney film?
it's not actually Disney. It was like one of the subsidiaries
Their
they
little-
owned. It was like TriStar or whatever
I
it
don't
was.
know what that is.
It was like Touchstone or whatever.
It's like they always want to divest from it later. Like, oh, well,
Correct.
it was really Disney.
Yeah. So this is
It was
interesting.
Disney's redheaded stepchild that this was produced under, let's be real.
You could blame this movie not for 9/11, but for the war in Iraq, partially.
Partially.
So,
Huge asterisk there.
a scene from this movie, you know, towards the middle of the movie when they start disarming the missiles, the virus, or not the virus, but the chemical weapon is in those little glass beads, like the little anal bead looking things. So there was somebody in British intelligence who did a incorrect and false description of the Iraqi chemical weapons program. Basically, he said that Saddam Hussein was continuing to produce weapons even though he wasn't supposed to, based off some false agent that he met. So he actually testified in September of 2002 to MI6 that they had a news source revealing that they were stepping up the production, that they had direct access, that staff were working 7 days a week to actually make these chemical weapons, including anthrax.
Oh, I remember when anthrax was trending?
Yep. So eventually, when people questioned the claim, somebody noticed that it bore a striking resemblance to this movie, and they kind of realized, like, why would you put a chemical weapon in a glass vial? That's not really safe. It's not really smart. So even though they kind of figured that it was bullshit, they presented this information to Tony Blair, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom at that time, and let him know that this was like bullshit and based off a movie and not a real report. Tony Blair still decided to push to enter the war in Iraq, which also gave us in the U.S. more ammunition to go to Iraq, because we had foreign intelligence also backing up the claims that there were WMDs, and it was all based off a guy making a false report using scenes from this movie.
Oh, I guess Bush is off the hook then.
Yeah, so one of the writers, David Weisberg, said, what's so amazing it was anybody in the poison gas community would immediately know this was total bullshit, such obvious bullshit.
The poison gas community.
You said they didn't do apparently the most basic fact-checking or vetting of the information. If you just asked a chemical weapons expert, it would have been immediately obvious that it was ludicrous. He said he received some funny emails after the report came out. He felt that it was funny, but it's not a nice legacy for the film, and it's definitely tragic that we went to war. So on that downer, let's talk about the movie. Do you want me to do a quick summary?
I think we should read one of the ones from IMDb.
You want to read one of the IMDb ones? Go for it.
I mean, do you have a summary?
I can summarize this pretty quick.
Do a summary.
Nicolas Cage plays Agent Goodspeed. He is a chemical weapons and I guess a bomb expert, because he's really good at disarming bombs throughout this movie too. But he wants to go on the field until he has an opportunity.
It's just a hobby.
Yeah, until he has an opportunity to go on the field, and then all of a sudden he doesn't want to go out on the field. So he goes on a trip to San Francisco to prevent ex-Marines from unleashing a chemical weapon on the city of San Francisco. Meanwhile, he just found out that
the city of San Francisco.
His girlfriend, played by Vanessa Marcel, 1996 Vanessa Marcel, is pregnant, and he invites her along, not knowing what the mission actually was. And he realizes he now has to go to the Rock, accompanied by a disgraced British intelligence agent who's been illegally detained for 30 years in the U.S. He was on Alcatraz, escaped from Alcatraz, so he has unique expertise.
It's
to
fine.
get the people
Habeas
back.
Corpus only had like 5 more years after that.
Yeah. I mean, 35 years after, but you know, who's counting? His character was Mason. So between a ragtag group of like Navy SEALs, 60-something-year-old former special agent, and a chemical weapons expert who's never been on the field, have to infiltrate Alcatraz, take on former, Marines and Navy SEALs and berets, and prevent a chemical weapons attack on San Francisco. And it's a Michael Bay film, so there's tons of over-the-top action and explosions
Shaky
and
cam
whatnot.
and close-ups.
Yep. I do want to say I did enjoy this film. It started off a little slow, but once Sean Connery got in the mix, it really stepped up.
Okay, but they made up for the slow with lots of white men yelling.
They did. I mean,
like right out the gate, lots of men yelling.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, most of this movie is just men yelling at each other. Like 90% of the dialogue is
there's younger white men yelling, and then there are older white men in the Situation Room looking stressed.
Yeah. What are some highlights for you? Yeah, let's first, kind of talk about some of the characters. I would like to talk about Ed Harris's character.
Oof, yeah, I've got some notes on that too.
I'm actually pleasantly surprised. I forgot how much of a kind of a sympathetic villain he is in the movie, and that's not something that I think about when I think Michael Bay movie, because most of his movies are all very on the surface. There's not very much subtext. Most of his villains are very much villains, and they're the bad guy, and it's very obvious that whether it's Nic Cage or Will Smith or Ewan McGregor or whoever it is, needs to go kill that bad guy. But like this villain played by General Hummel or Captain Hummel, I can't remember what his actual rank was.
General Francis X. Hummel.
He is kind of right. Like, the reason he's doing what he's doing is a noble cause. He's recognized that the military, and this is something we're still dealing with, failed to take care of veterans, failed to take care of veterans' families.
Lied about how they died.
Didn't take care of the soldiers on the battlefield, and then didn't take care of the families. And he thinks that, you know, he gave 30 years of his life and realized it means nothing. The government's willing to throw these people out. And so he's trying to get money for the fallen soldier, every soldier that ever fell under his command. And so you kind of like feel like you kind of get where he's coming from.
Right. You understand the villain's origin story. And what I love about it is like the situation that he's in and the people that he's leading. It's a no-win situation for the men he's got there on his team. Because, I mean, if you're not with him, you're against him. And what are they supposed to do in that situation? They're like,
well, and then also like,
completely stuck with this guy. And yeah, of course, he does present that super valid case to begin with. But even in his introduction of why he's doing this, talking to these men, he says, "Here and now the lies stop." And like, just the way he delivers that line, he almost screams it. And you can feel him like barely being in control. And it's like this brilliant case study for untreated PTSD and what happens when men in power don't deal with their shit. And when people are put in a situation where they have to follow them, no matter what, they've been trained to follow them. They've been brainwashed to follow them. He's giving this briefing about how the founding fathers were labeled traitors and trying to draw parallels between himself and his men and the founding fathers, which is just like such an insane place to come from. And it also doesn't reflect like a massive amount of confidence in what he's doing, that he's kind of grasping for these other reasons, these other ways to validate his choice in being a traitor to his country.
But he acknowledges that he's a traitor. He says like, this is basically a no-win scenario. But you will leave the country forever. Like, you will get $1 million.
He paints the traitor thing as something valiant when he compares them to the founding fathers.
Yeah. Which I think in his mind, he's doing the right thing. You know, there are a lot of people, unfortunately, who think they have a duty to fight the government when they're doing something wrong. And this is, you know, not the case. He says, you know, he has another moment in front on his late wife's tombstone where he's just like, "I wouldn't be doing this if you were alive." Like, it's almost like he's got it's a suicide
takes flowers to her grave and it is absolutely pouring rain.
Yeah, and he's just like, "I wouldn't have done this if you were alive. But, you know, I've done everything. I've testified. I've done this. I've done this." Like, you can imagine he's gone to like grand juries and he's gone to Congress and everything. Like, you assume he's done these things. But what I appreciate about this is like, he presents this show of strength for his men for most of the movie. At the very
beginning of the film.
But throughout the movie, he shows compassion. Like, when they finally take the hostages, he tells them, like, "We're not going to keep you any longer than we need to. We don't want to harm you." This where before they even get to that point, he sees a bunch of kids on a field trip and he's like, "Go to your teachers, tell them you guys need to get on the bus right now, leave the island." Like, he is actually concerned. Like, he wants to minimize collateral damage as much as possible.
He does. And that's what's so interesting about this character for me, is that, you know, he has all this experience. There's no one better trained for these scenarios than him. And yet he does these petty things, like after he calls up Womack, FBI Director Womack, at the very beginning to tell him, "Here's what's happening." Right. Just a heads up. He like slams the phone down dramatically. So he has all these incredible displays of like masking and displaying control and his training. And then you see like these little flashes of him just being completely unhinged and petty. And the things that anger him are not the major things. It's like snide remarks that get him most.
I think that goes back to him feeling like the soldiers and his troops were disrespected, because the guy that he snaps at is the 33-year-old chief of staff for the president. And like, he's talking to Womack and he's talking to, you know, these FBI people who served, who know who he is. And then you've got this, you know, to him, a child who's like questioning him. And he's just like, what the F? Like, I'm talking to the adults in the room. Like, who are you? What do you know about anything?
Oh,
Like,
gosh, but everyone in this movie is so condescending to everyone
Everybody
else.
is.
They're total dicks to each other the entire film. Like, when they're going over in the situation room, when they're presented with the scenario and they're going over their options, and, you know, one option is to, well, you know, we don't negotiate with terrorists, so why would we negotiate with this guy? What's the damage if we let him do this? And they're like, okay, well, about like 35 to 40. And is it the White House chief of staff?
He goes, yeah, that's not so bad. It was 60 to 75. And they're like, 60 to 75 people, not that bad. 1,000. It's like, why would you deliver it that way?
It was 40,000. I wrote down 40,000.
I wrote down 60 to 70,000. It was 60 to 70,000.
I don't think it was.
It was.
I think it was 40.
Either way, 40,000.
I think it was 40,000.
Either, whatever it was, it's still like a stupid way to deliver that. 60 to, 30 to 40. Pause for dramatic, like 1,000. Like, why not just say 30 to 40,000 per missile?
I can understand why the man was confused.
Yeah.
Also, he's our age.
Yeah. So going to I guess the next person that we should really talk about would be Mason, played by not Nicolas Cage, by Sean Connery. There was a theory that came out, like, while this movie was still in theaters, that he was actually James Bond, who got captured and disavowed by MI6. It's not true. They didn't have the rights. That actually wasn't the case running, but that is still a theory that people post when they're talking about this movie. So many people believe that is true. It's not, but he was, his whole thing was he was stealing microfilm that had like information about weapons and stuff like that. He got caught at the Canadian border, and Womack, who's now the head of the FBI and Joint Chiefs or whatever he is, he's way up there in the government. He like illegally detained this guy for 30 years and does a bunch of messed up stuff. Like they sign an agreement with him that if he helps, they'll drop the charges. But as soon as he signs the agreement, the guy Womack just rips it up. And Sean Connery knows this, and he's gonna leave. Like every time he escaped prison was to go see his daughter because the mom passed away, and he just wanted to have a relationship with her. And when he thought that they were doomed, he's like, well, I might as well go spend my last hours with my daughter. And then Nicolas Cage is like, yeah, but your daughter's going to die too. You might as well help. But he's just kind of an asshole to Nic Cage the whole movie.
And it's not like this guy doesn't have the skills to get out of Dodge if he so chose to do that.
Yeah.
He could have taken that opportunity and just like split.
Yeah.
So that was kind of sweet. I enjoyed that.
One of my favorite lines of dialogue in this movie, and it's just absurd, but the whole time he's just like coming down on Nic Cage because he's super smart. He recognizes Nic Cage is not a field operative right away because he knew some Roman quote from poetry. And he's like, oh, you're an intellectual, you've never been on the field. And the way he's handling himself in the interrogation room, he figures it out. But the whole time he's like kind of being like alpha male, like you're kind of a pussy. Like he says it a couple times, like Nic Cage says he'll do his best. And he's like, oh, only losers talk about doing their best. Winners go home and fuck the prom queen. And then he's like, Carla was the prom queen. And then Sean Connery's like, oh. And then there's a point where like he obviously Nic Cage has never killed anybody in the movie. And there's a point where a soldier pops up and Sean Connery throws a knife and it goes in the guy's throat. He's like, you can never hesitate. And then later on, Nic Cage saves him. He kills the guy and he makes a little joke immediately. He's like, I'm glad you didn't hesitate. And he looks at him all like a proud father, like watching his son score a winning touchdown or catching, getting the final fly ball out at a baseball game and winning the championship. He's like so proud of Nic Cage killing a guy. And Nic Cage is like gonna have PTSD. The rest of the movie, he's talking about like, I don't even want to have kids. I just want to go to therapy. Like, it's kind of a weird, I mean, it's Michael Bay, so it's like this weird macho machismo thing, but it's definitely kind of an odd interaction that he immediately makes a joke and is like beaming with joy that Nic Cage killed a man.
What did Michael Bay do before this?
I think he done Bad Boys before this, and then he did the
What about Bad Boys 2?
Bad Boys 2 was later.
Amber. Oh yeah, The Lost Milk of Arabia. All those Got Milk commercials. I feel like Bad Boys was a little bit more of like a formulaic blockbuster. And then this is where we start to see like the quintessential Michael Bay.
Yeah, you start to
like
see the spinning
the lens
cameras.
flares, the insane cuts that get faster and faster and faster, extreme like shaky cam during close-ups, which is an interesting choice.
Yeah.
And like when you watch the wide shots of stuff like the car accidents and big hits and stuff like that, none of it looks bad. So I really wonder like why they felt the need to cut around so much of it that way.
I don't know
if it's just to add movement, but this is like a hyper masculine film because of that. It starts out, even in the scenes where it starts slow, like the first 15 minutes of the movie, there's so much shouting and it's all this like military stuff, and it's just very, very macho right out the gate.
You're right about that. It's like even Nic Cage, even though he's like basically called a beta throughout this movie, he at the beginning of the movie, he's shown to be the best at what he is in terms of chemical weapons.
But he's also immediately funny.
He is, but he does this weird thing where it's like they're investigating a package that came from some bad guys that might have some sort of poison gas, and like he's training a guy, and the guy picks up a little doll that's in the case. He's like, "Hey, mommy, daddy," and then it like shoots out like sarin gas, and it's like this whole thing. And they keep telling him like, inject your heart and then defuse the bomb, kind of thing. Like if you die before you defuse the bomb,
right? He's supposed to inject his heart with a big syringe of atropine.
Yeah.
Which, okay, so atropine, it interferes with the is it vagus or vagus? Vagus nerve.
Yeah.
And so it basically stops that signal that would cause your heart to stop, I guess. But why would you do it preemptively, like before being exposed to something? And like if the gas was eating through their suits, it was caustic. It would kill you by like melting your skin
Well, they
off.
said that it would do that too.
It doesn't really matter if you've managed to keep your heart beating if you're still gonna die from infection of your largest organ.
As the writer said, this is not an accurate movie, and if the UK British intelligence did even a little bit of research, they would have known that everything they said was bullshit and based off this movie.
I guess like what atropine does is it like accelerates signals to your heart.
Well beyond the scope of this podcast. But my point was he was being, he's being called a beta this whole time, but in this element where he's the best, he acts like, the jock, alpha male bullshit kind of like ego, like I'm going to defuse this bomb before I get sick from the gas kind of thing. And then after he does it, he's like, inject my heart. Like he's all annoyed that they were telling him to follow procedure. So he has some, toxic issues.
Oh, they all do.
And
They're
then he's
all like hyper masculine, machismo driven characters.
and it's super weird. Like when he's having sex with his girlfriend on the roof, like after she, says she's pregnant, and they're up on the roof, he gets the phone call, and he's just like sitting there, like, yeah, this is good.
She like announces her pregnancy in a scene where they like forgot to mic her.
Yeah, that audio was weird.
It sounded like they only had her audio through his mic or through a boom or something, and you could hear where they had to like turn it up every time she spoke, and they didn't have quite the noise canceling capabilities that we do now.
Speaking of that,
which is so depressing because so much of her role in this film is just to be a vagina.
That's literally what her role is.
It's a vagina. She's a hot uterus.
Yeah, she is, though.
That hot uterus.
But it's funny that you bring up that mic issue, because I definitely noticed it as well.
It just like added insult to injury for me.
That's not the only weird like goof. Like towards the end of the movie, there's a point where like Nicolas Cage saves the day. He's supposed to, when they got them all, they're supposed to shoot up like 3 red flares or whatever and smoke grenades saying, hey, it's clear, don't bomb us to hell. And they're literally like 10 seconds from getting bombed, and he goes and does it, but the pilot had already shot a missile, and so like it hits the island and like blows up, and you see Nic Cage's character like flying through the air, but you see the wires still on the screen. Like we rewound it, and it's like you clearly see the wires, and it's like, how did they not catch that?
Awful. Well, I mean, technical goofs aside, they really do a disservice to her character. I mean, I don't even know her character's name. Here I am. Carla. They do a huge disservice to Carla. I mean, they basically introduce her so that she can tell him she's pregnant, and then they bring her back in a later scene after we've already been introduced to everything that's going down. We've already seen the Situation Room. We know what's happening to him, but he doesn't know what's happening to him yet.
Yeah.
They bang on the roof.
Yeah.
Well, and
he like...
and she wants to have a conversation about their future pregnancy because, like, when she told him, he was super cold and standoffish about it. And, like, I get he's supposed to be shocked or whatever, but it's like, dude, you're in your mid-40s and banging without a condom. What did you think was going to happen?
She was a Catholic.
So then he says that she can come to San Francisco. He's like, we'll stay in a nice hotel. We'll order up some champagne. Like, order champagne for who? She's pregnant.
That's right.
Rude. It is so
That's right.
rude. A poor faceless girlfriend.
Speaking of faceless girlfriend, this movie is like full of like character actors, like those actors where you go, hey, it's that guy. Like at this time it wasn't Ed Harris, but I would say Ed Harris is almost at that point for like younger generations where they kind of recognize him. But you had William Forsythe, which is one of those just, you know, he was one of the FBI guys. David Morse, who was like the second in command under Ed Harris's character. Just one of those guys you always know when you see him. He's in Green Mile, he's in this, he's in Disturbia, he's in so many things, but nobody knows his name. Michael Biehn is kind of a, hey, it's that guy. Movie nerds and sci-fi nerds know who he is. John C. McGinley is one of those kind of just character
Greg
actors.
Collins, he popped up again in Armageddon.
Yeah.
Also
Tony,
of Coyote Ugly fame.
Tony Todd, Candyman, but like most people just like see him like, oh, it's that guy, that scary, you know, black guy who's in a scary movie.
Steve Harris.
Yep. Bokeem Woodbine. Now, he's still working. He's in a ton of things, but, like, I know who he is because he's in Halo and he's in the Spider-Man movie. He was in the new He works a lot, but most people are just like, oh, it's that guy. Like, this movie was just full of, hey, it's that guy moments.
Yeah, a lot
which
of
I
them.
thought was, I mean, a lot of all the generic military guys.
I love that, though. Like, seeing people whose careers just continued to grow because they had a small role in a big movie.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And they just consistently get small but good roles. I think that's great. Like John C. McGinley has been working forever, and like people know who he is, but like he's one of those people that could probably walk around the street and people go, "Is it that guy? Is it Dr. Cox from Scrubs?"
There are a ton of these old guys who are still working. They've got updated photos, and they were credited as SEAL, Navy SEAL, SEAL Dando. I don't know if we've seen a lot from the guy who played Marine who dies.
Yeah,
that's a great credit though.
Yeah,
I'd love to have that on my
characters
resume.
like that it could have been.
Marine who dies, spotter, chef.
So yeah, the movie is full of character actors that continue to get work, and that's pretty great. I guess we should start talking about the highlights of the movie. This is an action movie after all, so maybe we should talk about some of the action beats.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like a highlight for me would be when he steals the Hummer, and it's like one of those old cell phones that is in the car permanently, I guess.
Yeah.
Because it rings, and he answers the cell phone of this person he stole the car from, and he says, "I'm only borrowing your Humvee," and then he like completely blasts through a fruit cart.
Yeah, it just blasts through that fruit stand, and then just as a series of escalations, like it completely like shears a VW Beetle like in half.
I like that they thought that it wasn't enough action that they had to add the shaky cam close-ups of everything.
Well, what's odd, and you mentioned it earlier, that there was a lot of like quick cuts and everything in this movie, and I think part of it is the scene, like the Hummer as, you know, utilitarian, like as much of it's like a utility vehicle and it's supposed to be tough and everything, and they were more like utility vehicles in the 90s. They're not invulnerable,
Right.
and that son of a
What a
bitch.
fucking asshole.
Good boy. Good boy, go pee. Good boy. They're not tanks. And you mentioned a bunch of cuts, and I think this is like, they probably had to have a lot of cuts in these scenes to swap out the Hummer, because there's no way that a Hummer came out of that unscathed.
There are a lot of like funny beats within this scene as well. Like Sean Connery's character, what's his name?
Mason.
So Mason causes like 3 car accidents within 1 minute, and then all he has to say is, "I hope you're insured." Like, what a douche.
Well, then you also have like Nic Cage steals a Ferrari.
Hey man, you just fucked up your Ferrari. And he steals the kid's dirt bike.
Yeah. And that scene is just insane. Like, it's just the downhill steepest parts of San Francisco, and then they end up at the it's not technically Golden Gate Park, but it's where that like
Crissy Field?
Yeah, where that big dome is.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a
Well,
ridiculous.
that's the Palace of Fine Arts.
Yeah, it's right by there. But it's just like a ridiculous, over the top chase that makes no sense. And somehow Nic Cage, who's never done stunt driving, his character has never been in a police pursuit or anything like that, is able to like out navigate everybody else. Now, of course, he's in a Ferrari.
Okay, but like, how is Mason not a little bit rusty at this point?
I don't know.
That's just absurd. Like, he just jumps straight into it, and you'd think that he's been actively trying to escape this entire time.
To be fair, though, he wasn't that good at driving it because he hit everything.
He wasn't that good at driving. He also didn't realize that Alcatraz was a tourist attraction.
Well, I mean, he's been locked up illegally for 30 years. I mean, and he had it, honestly, for being locked up for 30 years, he actually had a pretty healthy outlook on it, because there's a point where they ask, the banter between Nic Cage and Sean Connery is really good. They had some really good chemistry, but there's a point where Nic Cage is like, how does this day? It's a pretty good day for you. And he's just like, well, it beats my usual day of, avoiding gang rapes in the shower and everything, although that's dropped significantly. Maybe I've lost my sex appeal. Like,
there's so much good stuff like that.
But like the action is just insane. Like that scene where the all the SEALs get massacred in that bathroom because they trip John C. McGinley's like special motion sensor that he just invented. So of course they didn't know about it. Just brutal, and like it's a very effective scene, and then it just gets ridiculous. There's like a minecart action scene
right out of nowhere,
out of Alcatraz.
Where is this mine supposed to be?
I mean, it's just like a little cart for, I guess, like under the tunnels where they were excavating, but it's just absurd because they're going so fast and they were like panicking. Even Mason is like, I don't know what's going on. This is really fast. We need to figure out how to stop this. And they finally get stopped. They hit like a bump. They go flying through the air, and then they catch onto like dangling carts that are on like pulley systems. I don't know. Are those in Alcatraz? I have no idea. But immediately the bad guys catch up to them, and they're on foot.
And where the hell was the Coast Guard during all of this?
I don't know, man.
They've got boats. At any point, they could have like swooped in right in the beginning and handled it.
I mean, the Coast Guard, I'm not going to disparage the Coast Guard. They've got a distinguished history. They help with pirates and stuff, but they're not equipped to handle Ed Harris, John C. McGinley, Candyman, Bokeem Woodbine, or just really Navy SEALs. They actually had actual Navy SEAls as like some of the squad as well. But I mean, the Coast Guard can't take on special forces. Come on.
I love how right at the beginning when they're trying to convince Mason to help them out, like right when Nic Cage's character gets there, and they're kind of going through their introductions and sizing each other up, and Mason like immediately is like, I really don't give a shit. I don't want to help you. And is it the FBI director who's making him the offer?
Yeah.
He says, as if this matters at all to him, call your lawyer. You're going back to jail. It's like, bitch, he was already in jail. That means nothing to him. And immediately, like, this guy's like all hot and angry about it. They leave Mason alone for like 30 seconds in that interrogation room. And in that time, he finds something to score the glass with.
He found a quarter. Like somebody left a quarter on the table.
Right. So he can score the safety glass with this quarter.
Well, he took the chair, like the metal chair that he was sitting on, and used that to like put a huge like chip in the quarter so it had a sharp point, and then he used that to score the glass.
It's ridiculous. So he scores the glass, elbows it, and without missing a beat, like the glass is still falling around him, and he says, Womack, I shouldn't be surprised, you piece of shit.
It's such a good line. It's so good.
It's so good. It's like everything in this film is too fast, but in the best way.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. And knowing that a lot of the dialogue was actually improvised,
right,
is actually pretty impressive. Just to get, I think this last scene, because most of the action is just generic Michael Bay over the top action. I don't think we need to go through every scene, but I think we can close it off with the kind of the last big action scene, and I think it would be a good transition into the dialogue. And also what one of our listeners, I think it was Julie, mentioned, the Rocket Man comment. Good transition. But towards the end of the movie, they systematically take down different bad guys, and then the bad guys also kind of have a mutiny. Ed Harris's character never really intended on launching the missiles. Like he launches one as a warning, but ends up sending it out into the ocean, and then says, they called our bluff, we're done. The bad guys decide to turn against him. 4 or 5 of them get killed as they shoot each other. So it's just Nic Cage, Sean Connery, and like 2 or 3 of the bad guys left. And they take out a couple. And at the very end with Tony Todd, Candyman, he says something like, do you like music? And he's like, no, not really. He goes, what about Rocket Man? And he's like, I don't listen to that candy ass shit. And then he's like, well, the reason I bring it up is you. And he looks at him like, what? And he's like, you're the Rocket Man. And then he like fires the rocket that he pulled the chemical weapons out of. And Tony Todd like rides the rocket for like 20 seconds and then falls off the rocket, gets impaled. And that's, the over the top one-liner in this movie. But this movie's full of ridiculous one-liners from Nicolas Cage because he decided that this character isn't going to swear. Do you got any of the ones that you want to point out? Because you laughed a lot at Nicolas Cage's dialogue.
I think like my favorite from him was, how in the name of Zeus's butthole did you get out of your cell?
You gotta sell it. Say it like him.
No.
He got really loud with Zeus's butthole. Like if he was recording a podcast, it would definitely peak.
It really does force you to be more creative, and I think it is true when people say that it makes you sound less intelligent when you curse, because there's so much wonderful, beautiful creativity that comes out of actively trying not to curse. The beauty
really
in this
line.
scenario being Zeus's butthole.
Okay, there's just so many little one-liners. Like I already brought up the prom queen.
But aside from all the really fun one-liners and just unexpected humor, some of it, I would guess, somewhat inadvertently, just because the pacing is so intense.
Yeah.
I think my favorite of those moments is just hearing Sean Connery talk singing "Are You Going to San Francisco" while he's in the shower.
In San Francisco.
It makes me wonder, like, did he not like the song? Did he think it was funnier to talk instead of singing? Did he memorize the lyrics the way he memorized the script but didn't know the song? There's just so much to unpack
I don't know.
there.
It was a little odd.
I need answers.
The last thing I want to end with, because we talked about how Mason was so proud of Goodspeed when he killed the man. He looked like a proud father. But there was more character growth for Nicolas Cage character Goodspeed, because he did learn to swear by the end of the movie.
Oh, great.
So one of the final kills is, and this is one of the things that's unrealistic about the movie, the virus or the chemical weapon being in the glass vial. It's roughly the size of a decent sized gumball, but smaller than a jawbreaker.
It'll fit right up your bunghole.
But he saves one of the glass vials for some reason and hides the string of the rest of them. But he's fighting the last of the bad guys, and the missiles are about to strike. He's really gotta save the day. So he takes the little glass vial and like puts it in the bad guy's mouth, and he says, "Eat that, you fuck." And that's just like one curse in the movie. And then he has to like stab himself in the heart with the needle, and then like he's all jacked and pumped because he's
atropine.
It's just odd, but yeah, like this whole movie is like, it's weird because they're setting up Nic Cage to be like the beta, but the whole movie he's just like
the beta. God,
like,
please don't ever say that again.
I don't think that way, but that's what this movie is trying to, like, the whole movie is like surrounding this perceived nerd and
whenever
loser.
I hear someone say alpha or beta, I like feel my vagina
tighten
slowly closing
and dry.
It's just gonna shrivel up.
But like this movie has the alpha male machismo, and like the bad guys, the FBI agents, even the good FBI agents are all like just punching down on Nicolas Cage like he's like this nerd, but he does like all these weird like aggressive things, like the way he talks to his girlfriend and then buying the $600 record, strumming the guitar when he's
a
like,
man-child.
Yeah, and then also defusing the bomb first versus taking care of himself like he's supposed to, et cetera, et cetera. But
so he has an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex,
I guess, but this whole movie is set up where it's like he's learning how to be a real man. So he learns how to kill, he learns how to swear, and I assume he learns how to fuck at the end.
Wow. I hope it worked out for him.
Because they go and get married at the close of the movie is he lies and says Sean Connery got vaporized in the missile strike. Sean Connery gives him a clue as to where the microfilms are going to be, and they go and elope at this little like church in Kansas where Mason hid the microfilm. And then he runs out and he's like, "Hey babe, you want to learn who killed JFK?" And like that's the end of the movie. And
So
they were actually going to do a sequel to it with the FBI chasing Mason. But that ended up not happening. But I mean, that's the movie.
I don't think I would want to see a sequel for this. Even if it happened like 2 years later, it just was always going to be bad.
It's not necessary.
Absolutely not.
No. I mean, Michael Bay chose not to pursue it, and he didn't even talk about it until 2017.
Well, good.
So that's all I've got. You got anything else you feel we need to discuss?
I mean, after the Womack, I should have known it was you, you piece of shit. That's pretty much like the peak of this film for me.
It was a little slow. I remember you, while we were watching this, like, I remember this being more fun. And I'm like, Sean Connery's not in it yet. But as soon as Sean Connery gets in, like, he elevates everybody. Like,
I thought it was fun the whole time. I really loved just like the rampant, like you said, machismo, like bouncing around the screen constantly and seeing the dynamics between these, I guess, men, children trying to one-up each other constantly, treating each other like garbage for absolutely no reason, and having it blow up in their faces because they should have learned to cooperate more effectively.
yeah. It's a fun movie.
It's a great movie.
I enjoyed it a lot.
It's a romp.
I'm really excited. We're going to go watch the Massive Talent movie before this episode drops, but after we recorded.
So did it ruin your childhood?
Absolutely not.
Not
And
at
like
all.
I said at the beginning, I had a little bit of an asterisk because I've definitely watched this in the last 3 years.
Oh, yeah.
But no, this was a fun movie. It was between this and Con Air for this episode, but I almost want to do another Nic Cage movie for our next episode. I kind of want to do Con Air because that one has been a minute since I've watched it. I don't think I've watched that one in 10 plus years.
That one's a mess.
That one's fun. It's got John Malkovich in it.
Total mess.
And your boyfriend, Steve Buscemi. All right, let's wrap it up. Where can our listeners find you?
You
if they
didn't
wanna
ask
follow-
me if it ruined my childhood,
sorry.
Michael. Not everything's about you.
Did it ruin your childhood?
No. Everyone can find me all over the internet at Keanussance.
And you guys can check out everything that's MDXpods related at MDXpods.com, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, all at MDXpods. If you would like to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/MDXpods, and you can get early access to the episodes, bonus content, and and it just helps pay the bills. So thanks for listening, and we'll be back eventually.
Thanks for listening.